Hey,
Yes, I'm. Hey,
hey.
hey, hey, hey,
Hey, hey,
hey,
what's up? Oh, is this the first time we all have this new PFPs on
hey.
Town Hall?
It is. It probably is.
Yeah,
It definitely is. Hey, Joanna.
Hello.
Let's wait a couple of minutes. Let everybody settle in. See some other users rocking the PFP.
Yeah, Adil's flipped it.
Because that's Arbitrum.
Yeah, of course, of course. The most popular one, sunglasses. Well, there's all sunglasses. It's the most popular one. Touching sunglasses.
There's okay, we're recording as well. Cool, cool, cool. Can we drop PFP pack? Yeah, we kind of dropped it. Season 3 badges. Each one of those, it's a different PFP. it's, it's hard to now invite only the team when I see like Vinco or Wina also rocking these PFPs. Right, should we get going? We don't have that much time, so I would just start. I mean, it doesn't feel like a regular day. It's actually every day is a big day, but today especially times two. Is that right?
Today's a pretty big day. Yeah, there's obviously the announcement of Voltz V2 is um not something that happens every day. So big day.
Yeah, I did. Cool. But before we get into V2, shall we do like a quick recap of what happened the last month, where we were and where we at? Obviously, there's been a massive rollover happening as well. End of the season two, season three starting with insane badges. Everybody's already collecting them. But yeah, perhaps you, Simon, quick recap.
Yeah, I was gonna check it before coming. Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
that
Is
was
that
Siri.
Yeah, yeah. I was trying to check it before coming into the town hall, and it's kind of insane actually if you look at the numbers. So I think the last time we all spoke, we were around 5 billion in notional traded in aggregate. There's obviously now over 16 billion. I think it's almost 17 billion. So between 11 to 12 billion of notional traded in just over a month. Which is a lot of volume. And obviously, we just want to keep growing that. There's kind of various different ways which people are using the protocol, which is pretty exciting. Alongside that, there's been launch of new markets. I actually can't remember if we were on Arbitrum or not at the last town hall, but obviously we are there now. There's GLP live. There's a bunch of Aave USDC pools that are there too. And then the other thing that's happened is obviously we've finished season the last season and launched the new one. And that means that kind of badges are now on both mainnet and Arbitrum too. And that's obviously what's led, well, at the end of the last season is obviously what's led to all these PFPs people are rocking. And then, yeah, obviously the biggest thing kind of within that, when we think about stuff going forwards, is V2 and launching V2 today, or announcing V2, sorry, today, which is obviously pretty exciting.
Yeah, exactly. So last month we were on Arbitrum indeed. We announced that there will be season three also or enabling collecting badges season three on Arbitrum. That was part of like what we announced. Um, yeah, in terms of growth. Uh, if you look at the previous town halls, we always say the same. Like, it was amazing how much we grew last month, but this month it's like 2 or 3 times that. Cool. Well, but all of that is really cool, but I cannot avoid it. V2 big announcement today. Um, should we get going with that? I imagine there's a lot of questions. I've already collected some, but if anybody wants to just like jump in, both be a chat or if you want to be on stage, we're happy to just like have a conversation about V2, which is pretty large. I don't know if everybody had time to read the light paper. It's a light reading, I would say. Just 17 pages, is that right?
Just 17. That's right.
Yeah. So one coffee, tops 2 coffees, and you've got it. So yeah, any questions, anything you want to ask, jump in. And I would love to have you on stage as well, if it's what you want. So of course, V2, and we've got Art as well. So, and actually, the whole team pretty much is here. If anybody wants to jump in and answer questions and whatnot, feel free to do so. But big question: what is Voltz V2, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to explain it more from the problem. And to explain the problem, this is actually something which exists both in DeFi and in traditional finance, which is kind of interesting. But there's clearly been like just a massive proliferation of trading venues being created in DeFi, which is obviously great to see. It's like the same thing happened in traditional finance, but what's great to see in DeFi is just that volume of innovation taking place, where people are coming up with, say, new AMM invariants, maybe trying to figure out how to build order books on chain, maybe coming up with RFQ models. There's just a ton of stuff. However, one of the issues that creates is that if you're a trader or you're a market maker, if you're operating across two different dexes, you're actually required to post margin on both exchanges, which in some instances, those positions can actually be offsetting. So you could be long ETH perp on one DEX, short ETH perp on another. And instead of having those positions net off, you're actually having to maintain two different margin positions on two different exchanges. And when we were spending time thinking about Voltz v1 and thinking about the architecture that existed with Voltz v1, we kind of recognized actually that there was an opportunity to solve this kind of massive problem of liquidity fragmentation across venues. But in order to solve that, what we needed to figure out is how can we build a margin engine, which if you think about your kind of derivatives stack, your margin engine is in many ways your lowest level building block. How can we build a margin engine that is generalizable such that it is able to support and compute kind of the margin requirements for kind of any derivative instrument and any combination of derivative instruments. And not only how can we figure that out, but actually, like clearly, if you just kind of write enough code, you could probably figure that out. But it needs to be something that's actually capable of working in a gas efficient way on chain as well. So there's a ton of research that took place around that. Like honestly, the stuff we've announced today, we kicked off the research for it. I think beginning of December last year. So it's just an absolute ton of work. But what we basically figured out is kind of essentially how to build this generalizable margin engine, which it uses this kind of novel on-chain kind of risk matrix, which we can talk to if it's helpful to go through that in more detail. But we figured out how to do that. And as a result of figuring out how to do that, it essentially means that the margin engine can be parameterized such that DEXs can be built on top of this very low level building block. And all of a sudden, there is this really low level smart contract, which is capable of recognizing the positions that you have across different exchanges. And as soon as it's able to recognize the positions you have across different exchanges, it is able to essentially create one single margin requirement, which accounts for the fact that positions could be offsetting in nature. And what that effectively does is it therefore removes this problem of liquidity fragmentation that exists across different venues by creating a single margin account, which exists at the essentially the very base layer of the entire derivative stack. And clearly for kind of traders and market makers, there's a heap of benefits associated with that. And there's some really kind of like fun and interesting kind of details actually that you start to realize as you kind of get kind of more into the weeds of the way in which V2 works. So like just to explain one of those as an example, because of the generalizable design, you could actually open a position to say long ETH perp. You could open a position on one DEX, but because they are all using the same accounting logic associated with that ETH perp instrument, you could actually close that position on another DEX, which is pretty cool. So there's all these kind of like really interesting nuances that you start to uncover, but it's got a heap of benefits for traders and market makers, but then also for teams building DEXs. It takes away a lot of the problems associated with bootstrapping a new exchange. Because at that point that we have essentially decomposed the architecture of a derivative stack, anybody that's coming along looking to build a new kind of pricing mechanism, be that again like a new AMM invariant or be it an order book on chain, anybody that's coming along trying to figure out how to do that, they just have to focus on that piece. And then they can actually plug into this very low level building block, which already has a heap of active traders and market makers and liquidity, which enables them to bootstrap growth a lot more efficiently than they would have to if they then actually tried to not only build the pricing mechanism, but also build the margin engine logic and then also go and try and attract all the liquidity and all the traders. So it should also actually not just remove liquidity fragmentation for the traders and the market makers, but it actually should also help accelerate kind of the innovation that we see in derivative designs across the whole of DeFi, which is obviously pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably like from all the angles that improves also this enables innovation in multiple levels, like not just from things that people kind of start building on top, but also you won't have to put a lot of resources, as you said, on like building that liquidity. You can actually maybe focus on having the best trading experience, which is something that maybe you wouldn't pay too much attention because first you need to bootstrap it. So yeah, multiple degrees of improvements here. Thank you for the intro. And maybe can we go a little bit more in detail and just to make you talk all the time, Simon, maybe Arthur, you can go a little bit more in detail if that's okay.
Hey, Simon, go for it.
I wasn't going to say anything. I was saying like let's have Arthur go through some of the details that I'm not just talking about.
Yeah, recover your voice. Arthur, let's do you want to start with the margin engine, perhaps?
Yes, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I guess I think Simon has covered the like a lot of the rationale and thinking behind V2 and some of the details around how it works. But I guess if we were to kind of take a step back and try and maybe better understand like what are the pieces that kind of collectively make up both V2 and enable it to produce the outcomes that it produces. And at the high level, those are split into like the margin engine, the instrument and exchange abstraction layers, liquidation engines and the oracles that support all of this infrastructure. And if you want to just zoom into the margin engine, the design of the margin engine for V2 is heavily, I think, driven off of the learnings that we have gotten over time, kind of as we were building and growing V1. And the design effectively aimed to introduce such kind of changes as the ability for traders and makers to kind of collect their margin into the same place, the same account, the ability to create multiple accounts over which those can be isolated, and also the ability to be quite granular when it comes to deciding what sort of cross-collateral margining mode you want to choose. Be it a single mode where you're only using a single underlying token, where you don't want to worry about exchange rate risk, or be it a multi-token account, which effectively enables you to use any sort of whitelisted underlying asset to enter into positions with settlement tokens that are not necessarily the same as the collateral token of your account. And finally, I think like the other interesting way of managing collateral will be the so-called boss mode, which is effectively an idea which enables traders to get higher capital efficiency from their positions when they have correlated collateral and settlement assets, which could be
Boss
something like
mode, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Boss mode, yeah.
I said boss mode, yeah. And that's the margin engine. But then if you look at the instrument and abstraction layers, as kind of Simon has alluded to, I think the design is done in such a way that the actual kind of payoff function of a given derivative instrument and its accounting logic is present in the instrument, which could be something like a dated IRS instrument or an option instrument and so on. And then the actual logic of providing liquidity is kind of encapsulated in an exchange. And there's two types of exchanges that kind of can exist within this architecture. There's trusted and trustless exchanges. The way that the trusted exchanges operate is that they effectively enable margin accounts to provide liquidity to any of the registered instruments on the protocol through some mechanic, be it an AMM or some other model. And the main benefit of a trusted exchange is that it enables accounts to effectively cross-margin their maker and taker exposures across instruments. But of course, this benefit comes at a cost of kind of having to go through a more trusted kind of registration process, given the trust assumptions that kind of the margin engine needs to rely on this instrument, on this exchange. The other type of exchange is a lot more permissionless, and the way it works is that it effectively enables any team to build out an AMM or any sort of pricing mechanism, and then effectively enable other accounts to delegate their collateral to it, such that then this trustless exchange can provide liquidity on their behalf. This can be done in a completely trustless way because from the margin engine's perspective, this trustless exchange is just treated as a separate margin account. And the actual logic of accounting what each LP receives is kind of delegated to the trustless exchange. And I guess just to wrap up, the final bit is kind of the liquidation engine, coupled with the oracles, has also kind of been evolved in a few interesting ways, like the introduction of position transfer and liquidations, which means that this time in V2, liquidations don't have to trigger an automatic sell-off and unwind in the market, and instead can be captured by an account liquidator that's willing to take it in return for a reward. And there's a few more innovations that I think are probably more interesting to read in the light paper. I think we're really keen to hear people's thoughts on and opinions and challenges. So I guess that's a little bit more of a dive into V2 is made up of and how it works.
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. I mean, I just shared the link to Voltz V2 if you haven't heard. This dropped today. And yeah, thank you for the summary, Simon, and thank you for going a bit deep on the parts. And if you want to read more about it, which I would encourage you to do, I just dropped it on the general chat. That's the light paper that came out today. But let's switch gears a little bit. So for who are we designing Voltz V2? Maybe Simon, you kind of go a bit deeper, like who are the parties there?
Yeah, I guess there's three main users really. There's traders, there's market makers, and then there's actually other DEX teams. And like for all those three, there are kind of different degrees of benefits associated with V2. I don't want to repeat kind of a lot of what I mentioned right at the start, but from a trader or a market maker perspective, at the point that various different dexes are built on top of this V2 architecture, it all of a sudden removes this liquidity fragmentation that you have, where you have to post margin to multiple different exchanges, despite the fact that those positions might be offsetting, which just unlocks huge amounts of just a huge capital efficiency benefit effectively for all of those actors. And there's some like really kind of, as you start getting into the weeds, there's some really interesting things that you can start to build out. Like a really simple one is actually like smart order routing. So if you think about the way that 1inch works as an example across spot market dexes, at the point that there's kind of all the derivative dexes start integrating with a kind of base margin engine piece of infrastructure, and where they share those same instruments and the accounting logic that exists within an instrument module, all of a sudden you actually start having the ability to build similar components like smart order routing, which enables you to get best price or the best possible price for the least amount of slippage across different venues at the same point in time. So there's kind of cool little innovations that get unlocked off the fact that we now have this more composable design. And then I guess from the DEX teams, again, the benefit, I don't want to be repetitive of the stuff that we talked about at the beginning, but if you're launching a new DEX at the moment, you can come up with a really smart pricing mechanic. And there's a ton of people who are coming up with these types of ideas, but then to actually launch that protocol is particularly given the kind of bear market, right? It is way, way harder to bootstrap that liquidity. And what Voltz V2 does is it effectively provides that base layer of infrastructure and liquidity for these teams launching these new dexes, where at the point that you plug into that, you immediately get access to all of the entire ecosystem of traders and market makers, plus the ability for them to delegate, if you're operating as a trustless exchange, for them to be able to delegate their liquidity to you in a very seamless way, which just helps kind of anybody looking to kind of build a new kind of pricing mechanism. It massively helps bootstrap that process. And as for anybody that's getting into the weeds, and obviously Arthur was touching on this a minute ago, but as you launch a DEX, the path that we'd expect people to follow is one where they initially start off as a trustless exchange, but then there is clearly a benefit associated with becoming a trusted exchange, which would require going through a governance process. Because when you become a trusted exchange, kind of the traders and market makers that are operating on your DEX are able to then start benefiting from kind of the cross margining benefits of V2. So what we'd expect people to do is start off as trustless and then try and transition across, become a trusted exchange, and then get it kind of essentially an additional boost from a bootstrapping perspective in terms of the growth of their protocols. So they're the three main user groups, and there's frankly a ton of benefits across all three of them.
Yeah, indeed. I guess like as we move forward and we start rolling this thing out, we'll talk as well like how can you become a trusted exchange, etc. Cool, but obviously this is Voltz. Voltz V1 focus on trading rates, and some of the questions we've already had is like, how would V2 affect or impact Voltz V1? Since it seems this is like a deeper layer in the stack.
Yeah. So if we think about Voltz V1 and the architecture that exists there, there's really two core modules. I mean, maybe three, but just if you just simplify it, there's two core modules to the architecture. There's one piece which is the virtual automated market maker, which obviously in part uses Uniswap v3 code. And that really does nothing more than act as like a pricing oracle. So it defines the price. Really, it's your kind of source of price discovery. And then separate to that, we have the margin engine. And instead of thinking about these two kind of modules sat side by side from an architectural perspective, if you think about them one on top of the other, where the virtual automated market maker is the kind of the highest part of the stack, and the margin engine is the lower level part of the stack. Actually, when we then start thinking about that in the context of Voltz v2, what we're effectively doing is we're replacing that lowest module with something with it which is kind of way more generalizable and has all of these like cross margining and capital efficiency benefits associated with it. So what that means in terms of the rollout of V2 is that the kind of first exchange that exists on top of this V2 architecture will actually be the Voltz V1 virtual automated market maker design. So it's not like and that's where I kind of was picking up on the question in Discord earlier. It's complementary to what already exists. And it will enable us to kind of roll out V2 in a way which it continues to use V1 and continues to build on the kind of momentum and growth that is taking place with interest rate swaps. But it does that using essentially kind of an upgraded margin engine that is able to provide all of these cross-margining benefits. And then once that's kind of started as the rollout kind of phase, that's the point at which would start opening up Voltz v2, which is the margin engine, such that other dexes can start building on top of it. And then all of a sudden, for you as a user, if you're trading on Voltz and you're trading interest rate swaps, actually your margin account at that point starts getting access to these other dexes. Which is, again, just explaining how these things are complementary alongside each other.
There we go. And obviously, yeah, as being part of Voltz, being the first instrument that will sit on V2, you would be the first one to enjoy benefits of V2 in a way. So means that your accounts, you will be the first ones to experiment the boss mode account if you want to, etc., etc. And as other dexes plugged into it, that capital efficiency as well. Simon, sometimes it sounds like wind tunnel. I guess V2 has these things that just accelerates time around everybody. I don't know if you have like a massive window open next to you. It's not a big deal.
Can you actually hear that? There's a window that in my house that howls, and it's howling away.
I don't think it's the window. I don't think it's the window. I think it's the energy.
Yeah, it's V2. It's definitely V2. It has to be. Cool. So you mentioned a little bit like obviously this is how it affects V1, which is just positive. Let's move into like how is this going to be happening? So what's the planned rollout for 223?
Sorry, go on, Simon.
Well, I think that the high level is probably what I was just talking through, which is that we'll introduce the margin engine initially with V1 as the exchange, which provides this like complementary benefit where these two things will exist in parallel. There'll be Voltz V1 and then there'll be Voltz V2, but is using like interest rate swaps as the exchange at the top of the architecture. And it's from that point that we'll then start expanding out the ability for other DEX teams to build on top of the V2 architecture. Archie, you're about to jump in. There's one of the things worth saying is, like, obviously we've released and made the announcement around the light paper today. The research work for this started all the way back in December, but as part of doing that research, we've obviously been spending a lot of time building out essentially the smart contracts that enable V2 to exist. So the launch of V2 is actually not that far away, but it will be launched in a kind of MVP state with caps, just to kind of basically make sure we're rolling it out in a way that enables us to be secure and protect users as best as we possibly can. Arta, you're about to jump in. I assume it's because you're going to talk through just how far we've got on some of those pieces of the build.
Yeah, exactly. We've been quite busy researching, but also getting our hands dirty and writing code and trying to build out the infrastructure that's basically making this whole paper real. And I think as kind of Simon suggested, that the rollout is going to be done in phases, and not all of the modules are going to be introduced on day one. And it's going to be quite focused on kind of preserving the caps and alongside all the security testing and audit work. The work that's already been done is there's been quite a lot of progress on building out the margin engine in the single token mode, so without cross collateral margining capability. However, it already includes the risk matrix that effectively encapsulates the data from the covariances of the instruments and markets that exist on the protocol. And day one is just going to be dated interest rate swap markets, which work very similar to how V1 works. And the one thing that I think a lot of people might think about is, so what about the gas costs of that whole pipeline architecture? And I think that the main thing is that we're trying to build it in such a way that the gas costs are proportional to the number of instruments the position is using. So if with the goal of effectively trying to be actually more gas efficient than V1 for the instances where the trader has a comparable number of like a single position effectively, because that's what V1 enables at its limit. The kind of other innovation, I guess, like small, or rather like small, I guess, improvement rather, would be the kind of the introduction of the dated IRS instrument, which is effectively the instrument that enables V2 to empower interest rate swaps contracts that mature at kind of defined maturity dates. The logic there has been refined to kind of also kind of optimize for gas costs, but also to improve the accounting logic. A lot of this is also quite detailed in the light paper, and I think one of the final maybe like points to touch on is the logic around how fees are captured in the dated IRS VAM. At the moment, we are kind of using in V1 we are using a fee which is collected at the time of the kind of initiation of the swap, but in V2 the fees are actually going to be represented as spreads in the rates that people, variable takers and fixed takers, receive, and the delta between those spreads will effectively create a stream of income for LPs. And that's, I guess, another kind of high-level idea which we've introduced. A lot more of this is going to be becoming more, I guess, open in the sense that we'll eventually open source contracts and write the documentation once it's ready. But I think the light paper at the moment is a good starting point to dive deeper into some of these ideas.
Yeah, cool. And maybe some thoughts on security. I imagine, like, I've already seen questions about gas, and you already said, like, we are trying to optimize even more than V1, sorry. But if you go a bit deeper on security, I imagine that will be the second thing that people wonder: how can we keep this safe for everybody as much as we can?
Yeah, security is a big theme. I mean, in general, in the team, and also like as part of the whole process, engineering process around bringing V2 to life. We think that security is made up of a range of different kind of aspects, which includes things like processes around even how you write code and test it, and sort of like fuzzing and methodologies you use to try and crack it and break it. But also includes audits and lots of other ways in which kind of you can get more eyeballs on your code to try and kind of break it before before it gets to production. So the security kind of features of the protocol will also be kind of unleashed in phases. So initially there will be caps, but then eventually there is likely going to be other security measures as we do more research and analysis around how we can kind of safeguard the protocol, given the fact that the surface area of it increases as you start having more instruments and so on. And the other thing I would say is I'll just briefly touch on market risk. So in the beginning, the risk matrix is not going to take into account correlation effects between various different markets. So for example, have a correlation effect applied to, let's say, AUSDC and CUSDC markets, even though there is actually correlation there. But that's going to be done with the idea that to take a smaller step in the beginning, learn, gather more data, and eventually start introducing those further market enhancements to make it more capital efficient while still preserving security. I think that's at a high level kind of the thoughts we have around security.
Yeah, I think maybe the only things I'd add to that is it's obviously something that we care massively about as a labs team. We spend a lot of time on security, just given how important it is to test these things, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that smart contracts work as intended, and there's no kind of like attack vectors or anything. Even stuff like the rate oracles. If you kind of look at the analysis that we did around that in the light paper, we have been deliberately trying to innovate on that side as well to reduce these attack vectors that could exist. But in terms of the rollout of V2, we'll kind of release some more information on this kind of closer to the time, but it will be released with caps at the beginning, just to limit the amount of kind of value that can essentially go into the protocol. Whilst we're kind of running a generous bug bounty program, there's kind of going to be continuous audits taking place. There's going to just essentially be both from professional audit firms, but also we do a whole lot of internal audits as well as a team. So it's something which we obviously want to. It's something that we care massively about, and it's something that we want to make sure we're doing in the most secure way possible as we roll out V2.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you both mentioned basically bringing more eyeballs to the table. That helps. And that there was another question for how can you all as community help us out with V2? And as we usually say, like we do value a lot all of your input. So especially if you have time to read the light paper and you have questions or you spot things that you have concerns, anything that you want to share with us, just feel free to do so. And as usual, any bugs, anything that you detect that you want to share, like we will always try to come back to you as quick as possible. Feedback, we take it really seriously. Any security concerns you have, just feel free to share them. And in general, like spread the word. So we want to build V2 as something that it's composable, and that means that we need all the teams as well to build on top. And the more we can share, the better. And yeah, be aware as well that we need to have a ticketing system, a bit attached to the V2, but we have a ticketing system, but we're a team of builders. So sometimes it takes a bit of time to come back to you, but that doesn't mean we don't pay attention to everything you guys say to us. So yeah, anything the community can do to help us, we much appreciate. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Simon.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add, which is obviously an important point, is like everything that we're building as a labs team, we obviously make it available to the community. The community decides whether or not we want to introduce kind of this version of the protocol and that type of thing. Like the purpose of what we're creating is that ultimately the protocol and the ecosystem that exists is something which is owned and managed by the community. So there will be at some point in the future, there will be a vote around a community vote around whether or not we deploy Voltz v2 and also where that is deployed. That's not going to happen kind of next week, but it is something which is going to happen in certainly within the coming weeks. So there's just something which is worth looking out for, and it's going to be kind of the point at which the work which we've been doing as a labs team transitions across to become something which is kind of owned by the community.
Yeah, exactly. Good, thank you. So we're kind of running out of time, and I do want to go through a couple of questions that we got previous to town hall regarding V2. So I guess like there's a bit of interest in knowing. We kind of touched on it, but like, how would this affect V1? Since it seems it's something completely different, we'll explain that. But was this idea something we had on the roadmap since the beginning?
I think honestly, the short answer to that is no. It's something that we learned through the process of launching V1, where we're constantly thinking about ways in which we could improve version 1 of the protocol, and then obviously aware of this issue of liquidity fragmentation across venues and that being a problem both in DeFi and in traditional finance. And it just got us thinking, like, how on earth do we solve this? And it's not an easy problem to solve, but as you see in the light paper, we think we figured it out. And then it's not just a new product, it's something which is actually complementary to what already exists. And that's essentially how we arrived at this solution.
Yeah, exactly, indeed. And that also answers the next question, which is like, how does it change the focus, right? And yeah, if anything, it improves V1 and takes it to the next level. Cool. So I don't know if anybody in the team wants to add anything else that we might have missed, otherwise, or if anybody on the call wants to join on stage to ask a couple of questions, feel welcome to raise your hand. Otherwise, this was a special Voltz V2 edition of Town Hall, which it doesn't happen every day. So we're super happy that, 215 people showed up. We really appreciate that.
Big day.
It's massive day.
Right. Big day.
Cool. So thank you very much, everybody. As usual, Discord is your house, so any questions you have, just ping us. Thank you very much. Happy reading. If you haven't read the light paper, I shared it on the journal. It's very good reading. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Bye-bye.